Okay. Well, I'm so thrilled that you all came, and most of you have read the book, I'm going to assume. So even if you there are spoilers, you can cover your ears and go, but somebody may ask a question that is spoilerific, and for that I apologize. Because the ending, the twist is pretty good. Anybody see it coming? Okay, anyway. So we'll get started. I actually thought, if I could make this work.
The lower, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So, I actually thought I would begin with the story that you didn't read. Where this story came from. If you read my bio, or if you know me, you know that I served as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Jamaica. Now, as soon as I got to Jamaica, I actually was in the city at first. I was in Kingston. And I love Kingston, and I love the city, and I love the people. I fell in love with them almost right away. They're pretty extraordinary, and they're nothing like what I grew up with. Like, children are dead honest. I got out of a car at the consulate, and a kid came up to me and said, "Fata, beg you $5. And I'm like, "Hey, I'm not going to give you $5. You just called me fat." But he wasn't calling me fat. He was just distinguishing me from the other skinnier person standing next to me. And that's the way they were. They said it how it was. There were no pretense, and there was no political correctness. And I really loved that. And for the most part, people were very warm and welcoming and embraced us, and I loved that too. Even when they were mean to us, it was fun, because the way they spoke, it was kind of sing-songy. They would say, "Fire burn upon the white man, lightning and thunder." And I'm like, oh, they're kind of singing to me, but really they were upset. So I loved the people. I spent the first year of my mission in 2 big cities, and then I went into the bush. And I found things like this cave. This is actually video for my mission. It's 4 idiots in a cave. And we found this cave not far off the beaten path, and inside of it were bats and all kinds of stalagmites and really just crazy cool things that I found so interesting. And there were, if you saw when it started, there were steps, stone steps that led down into it. And I thought, well, that's interesting that somebody built steps to this cave, this remote cave. And as we got back further and further and further in the cave, we found more and more things that were interesting. I mentioned the bats. There was a time that the bats were right above our heads. Let me see, here. I thought that was really interesting until, in just 1 second, you'll see, in just 1 second, you'll see a bat actually poops on me. And then they were less interesting, and we wanted to move on. But I always loved caves. I loved caves. I remember in the 3rd grade, have anybody hiked the wind caves up here at Usury Pass?
Yeah,
I was supremely disappointed at that cave. Because you hike up there and it's really just an indention. They should call it a wind indention. It's not a cave. But I've always been fascinated by caves. And as we were in this cave, here there's about to be a bat dropping on us. As we were in this cave, a couple of things that were interesting happened. So, there, the bat just did that. A couple of things that actually happened. One, I lose my light here in just a second. Now, I had never before experienced complete darkness. But when you're in a cave and you lose your light, it is complete darkness. And it was exhilarating and terrifying. Another thing happened right after I lost my light. This is where I lost my light. So it's totally dark, and we cut it off for a minute. Now, we thought we had found a new passageway in this cave. We went back until it was a dead end, and we looked around, and we found, you can hear me saying I'm alone in the cave, because I actually went back for 2 other people, because we found a crevice that we couldn't see before that led up and around and just disappeared. And so, of course, we were going to explore that, so we climbed up into the crevice. So, this is me handing the camera through. This is one of the missionaries. So it's just this little crevice, and we're climbing up and back. And I decided I was going to go get the 2 other guys who didn't come back with us. So I leave the camera with him, and they're like, "This is amazing. We found this new cavern." If you listen, you can hear me saying, "I'm alone in the cave." And that's me running by in their new cavern that was the old cavern we had just been through. So we had looped back on ourselves and didn't know it. And so we thought that it was pretty funny that we ended up where we began. But in that moment that we found that crevice, there was this like wild adventure. And in my mind, I just thought, what if? And that's all. I was a missionary. I had lots to keep me busy every day. But at that moment that we found the crevice, I thought, what if? What if there was more? What if there was something besides the cavern that we were just in? And that always stayed with me. I went into the bush, like I said, and I found this place called the Cockpits in Jamaica. And it was a very remote area. Even though this island was very small, it was almost inaccessible. And so people didn't go into the Cockpits even now. And they called it the Land of Look Behind, which is what I titled the book. And I always thought, that's interesting. Why do they call it the Land of Look Behind? What's that about? So the more I looked into the history of it, and for those of you who've read the book, I explained in there, it's called the Land of Look Behind because slaves ran to the mountains and they hid up there. And people who tried to come and get them had to watch their back. Because there were ambushes, there were people lying in wait. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And that stuck in the back of my mind. So I came home and I started to learn more about their history. This video is almost over, I promise, and then it'll be less distracting. You're trying to listen to me and watch the video, I understand. I came home and these what ifs were rolling in my head. Now, I didn't have the aspiration to be a writer, but I've always loved to tell stories. Matter of fact, we would come home from a day's work at being missionaries, and often we lived in a house together, and I began to tell stories. And one time, my companion, who was with me all day, came and sat down with the rest of the missionaries to listen to me tell this story. And he sat there with the biggest grin on his face, and I said, what are you doing? You were there. You know what happens. He's like, yeah, but it sounds better when you tell it. And so I knew that I had a talent to tell stories, but I didn't know if I could write. When I came home, these what-ifs just kept swirling around in my head, so I started to research more about Jamaica and their history. And as I did, this story came to me. But not the story that you read, still. I started to sketch out a framework for a story, and I wanted to write an adventure that I grew up with, like Indiana Jones, an adventure like The Goonies, something that was just with me from childhood. And so I had this in my mind that I was going to write this adventure, and the adventure would take place in Jamaica, the land that I love. So I mapped out this framework, and then I went away from it for a long time, a couple of years. But I always thought I have this great framework that's sitting in this journal that I had handwritten, and one day I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to write this story. So a couple of years go by, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to write this story. So I get it out, and I look at my framework, and I thought, oh, I just totally ripped off Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This is worthless. I can't do this. Like, I can't do this story. So I put it aside, and I started over. Now, a couple of things about the Land of Look Behind were interesting to me. One of them were the Maroons, those runaway slaves that went up there. So I researched more about them, and there was a time period that they were very active, and it was in the 1700s, and they had been established, and that is when this region got its name. But before that, in the 1600s, was where they really got their origin from, and it was when the English invaded. The English invaded and pushed out the Spanish, and in the chaos, these people broke free. And I thought, I can do something with that. Because what I wanted to tell was actually Gideon's story. For those of you who read the book, I wanted to tell Gideon's story, which was someone like me. Someone who just was living an ordinary life, and I wanted to take something from the ordinary to the extraordinary. The problem is, as I started to tell this ordinary story, there wasn't a lot to it. For those of you who read it, it's kind of slow in the beginning with Gideon. So I needed something to push the story along. And so I thought of this British soldier. And initially, this British soldier was just going to be a one-off. I was going to introduce this concept of chaos between the British and the Spanish, and then I was going to move on and go back to it. But when I introduced Jarvis, he was so interesting to me that I thought, I want to know his story too. So Jarvis came with us. Rather than him just being, for those of you who read we have Jarvis's journal, and then we get to see what Jarvis does. And the journal kind of fills in the pieces in between, and Gideon carries this along with him. So I had these two characters now, and I wanted to follow both of them. but I thought, well, what are they going to find? I knew it was going to be a cave, but that's all I knew. I had the cave and the what if. So I started designing this, this really intricate backstory of these Arawak Indians. That I even drew a symbol, and then I looped in pirates, because originally the story was going to be pirate's treasure, and that the symbol was going to represent a buccaneer's mark. And so I drew this really terrible symbol. I should have brought it and showed it to you, but I was going to use that. I was going to use this terrible symbol, and I was going to stick it in the land of look behind. So this is actually a picture. Whoops, no, it's not. This is a picture of the land of look behind. So it's got a lot of hills, and it was formed by this limestone base that just crumbled with all of the water. And it formed these pockets, these hills. So I was going to put this cave and this pirate's treasure in there, and it was going to have all of this stuff. And I started writing the book. And I had this symbol, this terrible symbol that I drew myself. But then I was watching a TED Talk, and I actually found Sankofa, which is in the book. Now, Sankofa means, literally translated, means return and get it. It's an ancient African symbol. It's straight out of history. And not only did I see it in this TED Talk, but I recognized that I had seen it on rails and fence posts in Jamaica. But I didn't know what it meant. It just looked like a heart to me. So I found this, and I found out what it meant, and this whole story that you read came from that. So once I found Sankofa, and it tied so perfectly, that idea of return and get it, with the land of look behind. And it gave it more depth and meaning than I think I could have on my own. So here's Sankofa. And there's, both of those symbols are Sankofa. They both mean the same thing. How many people have finished it? Sorry, not to call anybody out who didn't. Okay, so that parable, the African parable, it totally doesn't exist. I totally made that up. But,
Thank you.
But it fits. Were you going to ask? You're going to be like,
Thank you. I liked it.
thank you. All right, sweet. Then it's real.
Oh, okay.
And it's totally real and meaningful, and I didn't need it up. It's great.
No, it is good.
Good. I'm glad. So, the symbol's real. The meaning of it behind it is real, but I needed it to fit into my narrative, into my story, and so that's where that parable came from. So again, I wanted to take something from the ordinary to the extraordinary. So we find Gideon, and he's working at a Circle K in Apache Junction. It does not get more ordinary than that for me. That's pretty ordinary. Now, I needed someone to come on this adventure with him. Someone to represent the readers, and that's where Todd came in. Anybody like Todd? Anybody like Todd so far? Okay. Todd is like an amalgam of all the friends I grew up with, so he's an idiot. And I mean that in the best, nicest way. Like, all my friends are idiots. And I, honestly, one of my friends who I met as an adult, when he read the book, his comment to me was, I feel like that Todd is more you than Gideon, which is true, because and he's like, I almost feel like it's your older self carrying along your younger self, and that's very true, and I didn't intend it to be that way, but as he said it, I go, oh yeah, you totally got me. Yes, it's my adult self bringing along my adolescent self. But Todd, I wanted him to experience Jamaica for the first time, because Gideon had experience with Jamaica. So Todd is your window to Jamaica and to Gideon and everything like that. And I would apologize for him being an idiot, but he just makes me smile. So Gideon finds this symbol that he recognizes in a journal, and he begins to chase the symbol. In the meantime, we also have Jarvis, who had his own symbol, and I purposely separated them. If you see, the chapter headings actually have a different symbol for which character it's about. So all of the Jarvis chapters have the Sankofa bird, and Gideon is actually chasing the heart, and he doesn't know much about the bird yet. So Gideon, he takes this journal. Oh, okay, this is another interesting point. Originally in the story, I always had the character Joe and Todd in my mind, But originally, they were going to convince Gideon to go. They were going to have some knowledge about this symbol that he didn't, when it was going to be a pirate's treasure. And they were going to have this like PowerPoint presentation like this and convince him to go, because he didn't want to, and he was going to be more reluctant. But when I found Sankofa and I found that it had some meaning, that's when the book became a mystery. Because I was going to write an adventure book. I wasn't going to write a mystery. But when I found these symbols, I decided, no, there's something here. There's something that I can reveal later that will be more fun. So you have Joe and Todd, and Joe is actually based on one of my friend's fathers. And he really is a treasure hunter, and has spent a lot of his life doing that. So now you have Jarvis. Now Jarvis, everything that happened to Jarvis in those historical chapters really happened. I pulled those right from the history books, right from officers' journals. The people that he interacts with, whether it be Yasazi, or whether it be Lobolo, or Deseris, those are all real people. And Lobolo really did flip and turn on the Spaniards, and he really did meet an end like the one that he met. Yeah, spoiler alert, for those of you who haven't read it. I dramatized what happened, because we don't have that records, but they found him without a piece of his body attached to the rest of his body. So that really did happen. Spoilers. So, and a neighbor of mine was like, oh, this is bloodier than I usually read. And I'm like, it's not really bloody, but that was history, that happened. Anyway, so Jarvis actually chases or leads us through a really interesting part in Jamaican history. At least I found it really fascinating. And what was happening when they were trying to control the island. And then Jarvis finds himself, though, not only in the middle of the conflict, but almost lost and without a country anymore. And I wanted to explore that. What do you do when you followed orders your whole life and you've done what you're supposed to do, and then you find that what you thought you were doing it for, that there really wasn't a reason? And so he finds himself always, for king and country, questioning, but why? And he questions that for a really interesting reason, which was John Davis. Now, John Davis was another character who was just supposed to pass through the story. He was going to be in and out. He was going to be Jarvis's prisoner, actually. But I liked him so much that I brought him along too. So he was a character that came with the rest of the book. An interesting thing about John Davis is this is someone else that I took from history, and yet he's not. I found out that John Davis was a common name that was adopted by pirates who didn't want to be known or wanted to change their identity. So for those of you who are familiar with The Princess Bride, think of Dread Pirate Roberts. And so I thought, yeah, that was really cool. So when John Davis talks about how he was born at sea, in some ways he was. Because that was the identity that he took on. But he's a really shifty character, and he's a lot of fun. At least I thought he was fun. So Gideon goes to Jamaica, and the first person that he meets is someone that he knows, and that was Bigga. Bigga is actually a real-life, Bigga was a real-life person. He was my last companion on my mission. And I was always going to base the character on him, but as I was writing this, he actually passed away. And so I thought, you know what, I'm not going to base it on him. I'm going to make it him so that he can live on in these pages. And a lot of the things that Bigga says in the book, he really said, he would say things like that to me. Like, you love man, things like that. He would say those things to me. Bigga was a character, he was one of a kind. And so I wanted him to be our guide into Jamaica. Only I found a cooler, tougher guide than Bigga ever could have been. And that was Tara. Now, I didn't conceive the book with Tara in it. Bonnie was going to take him back. Bonnie was their original guide, and he was going to take him back into the land of Bookbind. But then this idea of Tara came to me, and was super interesting, and I wanted to tell Tara's story also. So Anybody? I love Tara. She became actually my favorite character to write. She was. She's Superwoman in a lot of ways. She didn't take any junk. She was representative of so many women that I met in Jamaica. Like so many just feisty, fiery women. And so she kind of represents all of them as a whole. She's not really based on one person, but all of them. Let's see. I don't know how deep do we want to get into this. I don't want to spoil it for people once they get to a spot. For those of you who haven't read, does anybody have any questions so far?
Well,
Please.
you know, it's one we like to hear, so it's common, but what was your writing process? I mean, obviously you have a family,
Mm-hmm.
so how did you fit all this in to your daily life getting this book done?
That's a good question. I squeezed it in wherever I could. One, I read, so I had this as a goal for about 15 years. I wanted to write this book. And it just wasn't happening. So one year I decided, you know what, I'm never really going to lose weight or get in shape, so that's a dumb resolution. So I can stop having that, because I have that every year. You know, I'm not going to be a nicer person. I try, and then I have to deal with people, and so I'm not going to have that as a resolution. My one and only resolution is going to be to write this book. And then I read a quote that says, if you have a goal and you don't list something that you're going to sacrifice, you won't make that goal. So I thought, well, what can I sacrifice? Well, I love sports. I actually wrote for the Arizona Republic for 10 years, covering high school sports. I love to watch professional sports. I had a podcast at one time where we talked about basketball, and I decided that's what I'm going to sacrifice. So I threw onto the altar of book writing sports. And I took that time that I had devoted to sport, and I devoted it to my book, which I don't regret at all.
You can always see the reruns.
Exactly. I don't regret it at all. I found more joy in creating than I did consuming. And we spend a lot of our time consuming. I still do. Netflix? Yeah. We spend a lot of our time consuming, and I wanted to create. I actually really admire and respect people who create things, particularly storytellers, in any medium, whether it be film or books. Like, I love storytellers, and I wanted to be one. I wanted to create something rather than consume what everybody else was throwing at me. So that's really what I did. Please.
Good thing.
I know when I write, I have to work it out in my head before I put it down, and then I don't edit as much. Do you write and then rewrite, or?
I will tell you, with this book, I did it wrong, so don't do this. I will tell you how not to do this. With this book, I would write a chapter, and then I would go through it myself, just to kind of tighten it up a little bit, and then I would give it to my wife, and then I would start on the next chapter. She would read it and give me notes on that chapter while I was still writing the next chapter, and I would go back when I got her notes, and I'd write it again. And it took me so long. It took me almost 2 years to go over and over and over. But, you know, I had written the same paragraph sometimes 3-4 times by the time I got there. And then when I got done, I did it again. I went back and I wrote all the way through. My next book that comes out in October, The Unsaid, I just said, you know what, I'm not stopping. And I'm not letting anybody see it until I'm done. And I just wrote from start to finish, all the way to the end. And I got done and I was like, yeah, I think this is pretty good. And then I gave it to people to look at. And I got done in just under 8 months. So much, much faster. So just write. I love a quote, and I use it in my writer workshops all the time. George R.R. Martin says there's 2 types of writers. There's architects and gardeners. Have you guys heard this? So the architect, before pencil hits paper, or nobody writes with pencil and paper anymore, but before they start, they can see it all in their mind, and they have it all mapped out. And then they begin, and where they start, it's like a blueprint. Where they started in their mind is where they ended. Then there's gardeners who just stick a seed in the ground and then see what grows. I contend that there's a hybrid, because I think I am. A hybrid of both, where like I'll build a trellis and then stick a seed in the ground and grow the thing up the trellis. So I kind of know it's going to be over here, and it's going to go about that high. Because I did have an end. I knew I was going to end in a cave, but I didn't know how I was going to get there. And like I've talked about, there are some characters that just spoke to me, and that seed grew in places that I didn't intend. And I ended up in a place that I didn't start to go. But we still ended up in a cave, right? So I kind of knew where I was going, but I wanted to be organic, and I wanted to put these characters in situations and then have them react to it and not have a planned reaction. There was actually one part in the book that, okay, I think I can do this without spoilers. Here we go. There's one part in the book where Gideon and Todd have someone with them and are backed up against a corner with someone blocking their way out. I wrote that, and then I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I went to bed that night having no idea how they were going to get out of that. But I was like, yeah, and I ended the chapter on it. And I was like, there you go. Can't get out. Blocked. Shoot. I've got to figure this out tomorrow, because they're going to eventually have to get out of that. But that was a lot of fun to figure that out. And how they got out of it, so cool! Anyway.
Did you wake up the next morning knowing how they were going to get out?
Yes. I woke up with a character's name on my lips, and I'm like, salvation, there it is. So yes.
Sometimes just going for a walk helps too.
I went for countless walks while I was writing this book. I've never, and knock on something that is wood, I've never suffered anything like writer's block when people talk about it, because I just go for a walk. I'll write to a point where I need a break, and I'll go for a walk. And on a walk, I usually can't wait for it to end, because I think of something and I'm like, oh, I need to get back and write that. That is good stuff. My problem is sometimes my mind goes on to other stories that I want to tell, and I'm 2-3 books later, and I'm like, oh, that's going to be awesome when we get there. That's going to be great. Yeah.
You mentioned George R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
Those of you that read George R.R. Martin, he's writing, I guess, now an 8-book series.
Mm-hmm.
And he's on book 6, and he just hasn't made any progress, and his fans are being nasty. And he was on a panel with Stephen King, and he said, Stephen, how do you write so fast? And Stephen King says, well, you sit down and you write.
Yeah. Talk about a prolific writer, and somebody who can just write anything. And Stephen King is so generous with what he knows about writing. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you're going to get a lot of political stuff, but you're also going to get a lot of incredible advice for writers. And I love Stephen King, and I am just absolutely terrified of what he writes. Because I'm not a horror guy. I don't like things that scare me. Mystery, suspense, thriller, that's fine. Like horror, I can't sleep at night or walk by storm drains. Thank you, Stephen King. I'm not into that. Yes, we all float, indeed. But yeah, Stephen King, very incredibly prolific writer. And he does just sit down and just cranks it out.
Yeah, and George R.R. Martin, I mean, he's been doing this for 20 years, and people are afraid that he's going to die before he finishes.
I just want him to eat more salad. Just please. Just take care of yourself, buddy. Every time I see him, I'm like, he is not looking well. But yeah, he needs to. Yeah.
But I think, from what I've read and stuff, he just procrastinates. I think Stephen King's right.
Yeah.
You have to sit down and do it, and a lot of people don't like to do that.
Yeah. YouTube's way easier. Mm-hmm. Way easier than writing. You're like, look at this. What's this? Let me look at that. Any other questions? Please.
Yeah, this may be a spoiler.
All right, spoiler warning. You've all been warned.
Okay, where did you come up with the idea? Did you encounter it in Jamaica for the duppies?
Duppies.
Duppies.
Yes. Okay, yes. So duppies are what Jamaicans call spirits. Okay? Yeah, so I have a couple of fun duppy stories. So they believe in them okay, there's 2 things that Jamaicans believe in. That WWF wrestling is real. I'm serious, I've had arguments. And in spiritual things. And duppies are in that. Okay? They believe in dreams. If they have a dream, it's like it was a vision. And I love that. But duppies, that's what they call ghosts. They're terrified of them because they're real and they're going to get them. So I incorporated that into the story. I actually introduced the ideas of duppy at the very beginning, and then it comes back in a really cool way at the end, which I mean, no spoiler. Well, I thought it was cool. And it's weird to talk about your own writing like that. I'm like, that was awesome. Sometimes I read it and I'm like, this is so good. Anyway.
You just drive me crazy.
So,
I did, I love that part.
yeah, right? And so, anyway, and my brother-in-law, he was one of the first people that read the book and it was reviewing it for me. And when he got to that part, he said he got to the next page and he goes, wait a minute, did he just do that? Like, did he just walk? Because I walk you right into it, and you just go, oh, and you just accept it, and then you're like, wait, am I accepting that? But you do. Anyway. So yeah, the idea of duppies. Bigga was actually terrified of duppies. The first night I got him, we lived in a house in Maypen, and we decided we were going to play a joke on him, because anyway, it was going to be fun. So we got there that first night, and we said, okay, here's the bathroom, here's our bedroom. Listen, if you hear anything in the kitchen, we have duppies, so just don't go in there. It's usually at night. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's just cool. There's duppies in there. Just if you hear anything, don't go in there. So we lived with 2 other sets of missionaries on the other side of the house, and so they got up in the kitchen in the middle of the night. It was pitch dark, and they're making noise, and he's all, Blaylock, like laying in bed in the dark, Blaylock. I love Bigga. And then they came in these. They had navy blue sheets, just head to toe, and they were locked in, and they were like, ooh. Anyway, they said the duppy dumb will come for you. And he was terrified. It was fun. So yeah, duppies, absolutely. I didn't make that up. It's a thing. Speaking of which, Robin wanted me. For those of you, did anybody have trouble getting through the patois, or it was kind of difficult? It's different. Robin wanted me to read. Can I borrow your book? Would you guys like me to read some patois so you can hear what it sounds like? All right. So, I'll tell you, I wrote this a couple of ways. The first time I wrote patois, which it's not a written language. And so I wrote however it sounded. Not however it sounded. I wrote how it was, how it's supposed to be. But as you read it, it doesn't sound phonetically like it's written. And so when I went to the publisher, they're like, you can't do that. And so I walked it back a little bit and I wrote it phonetically. So I wanted to have patois in there. I thought about just writing it in English, but like I said, I love these people so much. And this is in many ways my love letter to Jamaica. So I wanted it to be authentic and I wanted it to transport you to a different place. So I made the choice to use patois. And then I made the compromise of writing it phonetically, knowing that I was going to be killed by all of the Jamaican people who were like, that's not how I sound. Anyway, but this is how they sound. So I'm just going to read when Bigga meets Todd, because it's one of my favorite parts. It picks up in 85. So Gideon is actually chasing someone who just stole his wallet. So it says, he briefly lost sight of the boy until the crowd gave way and he found the boy struggling to free himself from the grasp of a dark, rotund man with an enormous smile. To his surprise, Gideon recognized him. Bigga? He asked as he halted his pursuit and tried to catch his breath. Elder Goodwin, back foot, are you that? The man replied and held fast to the boy's struggling wrist. And then I'll go to the next page where they pick up more dialogue. So what are you doing here? Asked Gideon. Me? I drive. Bigga responded. When'd you get back? Me just a come. Gideon said. You drive a bus then? No man, me a taxi driver. Bigga answered. This little thief take away your billfold. Yeah man, him lift it from my pocket. And he tapped his back pocket. You can't keep it back there. So, those of you who haven't read the book, he had just instructed Todd to not keep his wallet in his back pocket. Bigga chided. Me no. Gideon said, as Bigga wrestled his wallet from the boy and handed it back to him. Thanks. Then Bigga grabbed the boy by the shoulders and pulled him close. He stooped down until they were eye to eye. Look here, you little thief. If I ever catch you, no thief in round here, again, me I go give you one hot lick. Yeah? He released the boy, who stumbled backwards and quickly ran off. The boy disappeared once more through the crowd as Todd arrived. He pressed through the crowd and stopped when he saw Gideon. Out of breath, he bent over and placed his hands on his knees. He looked around the crowd and then back to Gideon. Gideon nodded to his friend and held up the stolen wallet to assure him that the situation was in hand. Bigga walked over to the clearly out-of-place newcomer and threw his arm around him. Oh, who this, me brother? Bigga said with a hearty chuckle, "Yeah, man." Gideon responded, "Your brother from another mother." With an arm around Todd's neck, Bigga squeezed him and belted out his infectious belly laugh. Many onlookers joined the laughter, while Todd stared at Gideon and looked utterly confused. "Bigga, this is Todd. Todd, Bigga." Gideon made introductions. "Where's your taxi?" And then they take off from there. So there's your taxi driver. So that's a little bit what it sounded like. Again, my brother-in-law, who said that he had a difficult time getting through the patois, he asked me to read something to him, and he goes, "Oh, they sound like Bob Marley." And I said, "Yeah."
That's right.
Yeah, they sound like Bob Marley. Yeah, so that's a little bit of patois. And Bigga, that was a line that I stole right from Bigga. There was, he was a big guy. Everything about him was big. So everybody called him Bigga. And there was this one time we went and visited this lady, and she had the fattest baby. And he goes, "Oh, who this, my brother?" And I laughed so hard because it was this fat baby, and he was like, "Yeah, it's my brother." Anyway. Any other questions?
One thing I was kind of reflecting on the story, and I really thought that Jarvis was a good idea because he kind of pulled you along the history of the thing. I mean, I think it was good to kind of sneak that history in and have a better understanding, and of course the clincher at the end.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay. And I was wondering with the professor, was that anybody you knew? And I mean, wow, he kind of.
He comes out of no, yeah. So well, just no spoilers, but yeah. So Professor Gervais was no one I knew in Jamaica, and I conceived him just as an idea, and he wasn't going to turn out to be what he was when I originally conceived him. But I based him on my children's orchestra teacher, the way he looked. Like I just thought, well, that's a distinguished guy. And I like that, and so I'm like, Gervais looks like this guy. Professor Gervais looks like this guy. So that's where he came from. So I didn't know anybody like him, but he was going to represent this larger mystery that they were stepping into.
Yeah, I felt most of the story was really action. I mean, I get the mystery, but it was interesting. You said it always started out as an action story. And that's really kind of, and a lot of books have a lot of different genres in them. Because you even had a little supernatural in there too.
Spoilers. Yeah, but yes.
Well, but no.
And I tried to put in elements that I loved.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't know that I had written a mystery. It was the publisher who told me that. I was like, I turned in an action-adventure script, and they were like, "It's a mystery," and I'm all, okay, I'll go with that. Yeah, sure, there's a mystery, we'll go with it. Because I wanted to put in a lot of stuff that I loved. So, in my heart, though, it was always like an action-adventure tale, just a fun, good time. But I felt like the mystery gave it a depth that I couldn't have got just by Todd and Gideon tromping through the jungles of Jamaica, which would have been fun for some of it, but I don't know where they would have ended. Besides in the Temple of Doom when my original. That wouldn't have been great. I'd have been like, But I did an homage to the Temple of Doom. Did anybody catch it? For those of you who read it? So I left it in there for the Temple of Doom. All right, I'm going to say it's how a certain character meets their end.
Oh, okay.
That's an homage to the Temple of Doom. But see, there we go. No spoilers for those of you who haven't read it. I'm so proud of myself because I could have just spoiled the heck out of this. So anyway, okay. Okay. Opening scene. Beijing. No, I don't. I'll walk through the Temple of Doom. No. Or is it Bangkok? Where did they end up? Come on, somebody tell me. We're in like the Temple of Doom room, isn't this like? I look at it like it's totally Indiana
with the
Jones.
pictures and the
Yes.
place to go.
Right, there you go.
There's caves in there, I'm sure.
Any other questions? These are good questions.
I just wondered if you've ever gone back since your mission, gone back to Jamaica. How often have you gone?
Just once. My wife and I went on our honeymoon. And I decided that I was going to do like the touristy thing, and so we stayed at a resort and everything, and it was a different Jamaica than I had ever experienced, and I was like, oh, this is lame. Like we should have went out into the jungle. And anyway,
You kind of bring that up in the story too, right? Because they tell them, you should go on the beach, go on the beach.
oh yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally, and that's what the Jamaicans would have said if you'd have been like, I want to go into the jungle and tromp and look for a cave. They're like, why? Like, go onto the beach.
Go to the beautiful place.
That's why you come here. But there's actually so much of Jamaica that's just not the beach, that nobody ever sees, that nobody ever gets to see. And I wanted that idea, hopefully I wanted this book to, I don't know, make people want to go and see that. I also wanted to convey the idea that the world is not what we think it is. Like we just accept things and we do that just so we can move on. That, okay, that's there and I know that and there's nothing beyond that. I wanted the idea of questioning that is there really, you look at Google Maps for instance, it's really easy to go, yeah, we've seen the whole world, it's right there, and I can click around and I can see it from right here. But do we really know what's out there? And that's kind of what I wanted to challenge is that we haven't seen it all and we don't know it all. That there are things in this world that we have yet to discover. And I wanted to put that idea in a modern context, not in an Indiana Jones, in a internet world. There's stuff that we haven't discovered. However, I stopped myself just now because I actually said it in the late 90s because I put it before really the big internet and cell phones and smartphones. I wanted to get away from that because it would have been easier for them to get out of trouble if they had a cell phone. We're here.
Not if you lose your flashlight.
That's true. That's true. I'm going to address the flashlight actually in the next book. Anyway, it'll be fun. But please.
There really are crocodiles on Jamaica.
Oh yeah. So that brings me to something that I really wanted to talk about. The Jamaican seal. I talk about it in the airport where Todd makes an inappropriate gesture and puts his finger up somebody's nose. Anyway, Todd's an idiot. So the Jamaican seal, that is the Jamaican seal, and it really does represent all of those things. And that was another thing that I found interesting. When I got there, they had these two arawak on each side of the seal. I never saw an arawak while I was there. And so that was another question in the back of my mind, well, what happened to them? And so when I found out what happened to them, I also wanted to tell their story. It really is part of the whole island story. But yeah, the crocodile on top, there are crocodiles. I rode my bike past rivers that had crocodiles just sitting in there. I was like, oh, I'll ride a little bit closer. So then it's like, do you get hit by a car or do you get sniffed at by a crocodile? You just kind of make compromises.
Probably made the right one.
Yeah. I will say that they weren't the size, at least the ones I saw, they weren't the size as the ones that we encountered in the book. I upped them. I took a couple of liberties to tell this story. One of them, and I'm waiting for a historian to call me on it, flintlock muskets. They were about 30 years after this, but I thought it would take away from the intensity a little bit if like Jarvis was like lighting the fuse and he's like, I'll be right with you. So I took a couple of liberties just for action's sake. I'm waiting. I out myself so that somebody can't call me on it and be like, did you know that the French? Yes, I do.
Somebody was over in France and brought it back.
That's true.
So can you, some of us heard it, but can you kind of talk a little bit about your next book? It's part of this, I can't remember, did you say?
No, my next book's separate. So I'm working on the sequel to The Land of Left Behind right now. I'm actually, let's see, is this gonna spoil where it leads? It might. Okay, I'm not gonna tell you where it picks up. It's the same character. We're gonna follow Gideon again on a different adventure.
So it's the land of look ahead.
It's Land of Again. I'll tell you what it's called. It's called Crooked Top Mountain. Some of you may know what that is, and some of you might not, but you'll learn. But no, my next book that comes out in October is actually called The Unsaid. And for those of you who weren't here, it's about a heavenly bureau that monitors our unspoken thoughts, the things we choose not to say and why. somebody, I actually had the idea, my wife and I were going to bed and we were talking, and I chose not to say something because I knew, I learned that it would not be well received. And so as I was laying there falling asleep, I thought, well, what happens to that thought? I had it. I chose not to say it. Where does it go? And this idea of, well, what if somebody is watching? And what would that be like? And what would their lives be like? And what would happen if they chose to get involved? So this story came from that. And like I said, this jumped ahead of the sequel to this because it just came to me. Everything just came to me, and it just kind of flowed out of me. So I
Say
had it right there.
that title again.
It's called The Unsaid.
Unsaid.
The Unsaid, yeah.
I'm sure you're
That's my life.
No, not the undead. The unsaid. The undead's different. Don't check out the undead.
That would be a Stephen King movie.
That would be a Stephen King. Mm-hmm. Please.
As an author, can you just go through a little bit of like how you go about writing a book? Just like, do these characters come to you and do you know where they're going, or do they kind of take a life of its own? I just...
All my characters, at least in the books, so I've only written 2. I've written this one and the one that's coming out. They're real to me. Some of them are because they come from me. I feel like I told my wife for, I don't know, a year, like, Gideon is not me. And she would just give me that look like,
Yeah, right.
but it kind of is. And I'd be like, no, it's really not. But it came from me. So a lot of these characters there's parts of me in them, but they're all real to me. And yes, they all live to me. Like, I was talking to my kids about John Davis, who, if you read the book, he's one of my favorites. And he's very real to me. So much so that I have an entire backstory for him that's not in the book. I can tell you where he came from and how he got to be where he is. And I was talking to my kids about it, and they're like, you should write that book. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to like create this like shared universe. And I'm like, I'm just going to, you'll know everyone's backstory. Although I would tell, I have a story that I would tell for John Davis and for Ketloa. For those of you who read the book. Ketloa was originally just going to be this big hulking character. But then I had the idea of where he came from and what he stood for and who he was. And so he kind of became more than that. But
It was a surprise.
yeah,
I like
he was a surprise to me too.
Thank you.
And I loved him. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Ketloa means black rhino. And so at the end of the book, I throw a little thing in there about a black rhino. If you go look at it in the last chapter, there's one piece in there that ties that together that no one will ever get. That's why I'm telling you, because you'll never get it. But for like the 2 people who are like, oh, Ketloa means black rhino, they'll go, oh, I see what you did there. Anyway, there's probably like 10 things in the book that no one's going to get, and I'm all, but I enjoy those things. I write them for myself because I love, like, in film, television, or movies when they put Easter eggs in there. So I actually put several Easter eggs in this book. For those who have eyes to see,
Yeah.
you'll see. One of them is, if there's any Lost fans, I hid all the numbers to Lost in chapter 2. So they're all in order. No one will get it, but as I'm writing, I'm like, this is so good. No one will ever find it. But I know they're there. So, thank you, Damon Lindelof.
Well, if somebody comes up to you sometime and says, oh, I get that.
I get it. I found, yeah. Oh, yeah. So there are little treasures to find in there as you're reading. There are little things you'll go, oh, okay, I see. But back to your question. Wow, I went sideways. Yes, all the characters, to me, the character has to be real to you, or it's not going to be real to anybody else. So, yeah, they all live and breathe to me and have their own lives and their own stories. That's kind of how I approach it. So I want to challenge them and then see how they'll respond. And it wasn't always the way I thought. And then I had to get myself out of that.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah.
Should have sent it.
Any other questions?
You have an online question.
I do, my goodness.
Vicky Downs.
Okay.
She's asking, is it safe for a tourist to explore Jamaica off the tourist path?
No. Yes, I would say absolutely, with a couple of notable exceptions. When Gideon gets to Jamaica, he chooses not to take a taxi, or not to take a bus, and he takes a taxi. And they go into Parade, which is in Trenchtown and Tivoli. Those are the ghettos of Jamaica, not safe for tourism. Those are the ghettos of Kingston. No, the buses are terrible. And matter of fact, they will squish, so all of you right here in the room, and for those of you who can't see online, we probably have what? Probably about 15 people right here in the seats. You can all fit, I know this, on a 12-passenger bus. You don't think you can, and that's with the driver. All of you can fit. Because I've seen it, because I've done it. I've been up against the wheel well, and you can fit a few chickens in there too, and maybe a goat. And they'll do it regularly, over and over and over again. Those are country buses. The city buses are worse. I was never felt up more in my life than on city buses, and I was like, oh, excuse me, yes, good, it's nice to meet you too. There's absolutely nothing you can do. No, the buses aren't great. You could go like into Montego Bay, and you could hire, I would say book it beforehand, because there'll be people waiting to take you somewhere. Don't go with them. But there are tourist companies that will take you all over the place. There are adventure tourist companies in Jamaica that will take you to the cockpits. But they don't take you to fun, magical caves. They take you to, it's not magical for those of you who haven't read it, it's mystical. But they'll take you like zip lining through the cockpit, so you'll be like, ah!
Don't fall.
But yeah, I would say if you ever get a chance in your life to go to Jamaica, go. It is an incredible, incredible country with wonderful people and just the most beautiful country you'll ever see. Just maybe go with somebody who's been. Call me, I'll go with you. Let's all go to Jamaica. Everybody ready?
No buses though.
All right, no buses. Well, I'll drive a bus. How about that? And we'll pack all of you in one. It'll be fine. I know how to make you fit. It's like a human puzzle. Good question, Vicky.
I'll bring something to drink.
Oh, the drinks in Jamaica. One of my favorite drinks, and I tried to put, okay, that was another thing. I can share this. So the first draft of this book, the book that you read was 108,000 words. The first draft I turned in was 119,000 words. And they were like, no. The publisher was like, we like the story, but no. I put in everything I loved about Jamaica, including a lot of the food. And some of the food stuff stayed in there. Like, we talk about rice and peas. I love rice and peas. They talk about patties a little bit. They talk about bun and cheese, which is terrible, but for me, nostalgic. Like, I love it. But I tried to get my wife to have bun and cheese, and she's like, no, that's gross. So I tried to put a lot of what I loved about Jamaica into the book. And initially, it was just a love letter to Jamaica. So what one of the editors helped me do is say, okay, if it doesn't move the story along, it's got to go. And that hurt me a lot, because I did put a lot of what I loved about the country in there, but it didn't move the story along, and so it had to go. I put in jerk chicken. I actually subtly put in jerk chicken, which I really love, in the Jarvis chapter, and talked about his experience with jerk chicken and how it made him violently ill. And he learned not to just take and eat things without questioning that. Because I learned that a couple of times. I got violently ill without asking, what is that? Sometimes you didn't have to question it like a chicken foot. You're like, okay, I know what that is. I don't want to. Please don't make me. But chicken foot's actually not bad. It's just kind of all bone. And you just eat it. So, any other questions? Oh, what the drink thing. One of my favorite drinks was Ting. And you can actually get it here at some international markets, like if you go to Lily's in Chandler, but it's like grapefruit soda. But it's Jamaican grapefruit, so it's really sweet. It's a Ting. I recommend that. You said this was a foodie group. We could really get into some foodie stuff.
Do they have a lot of farms there with all that stuff, or people just do it,
Yeah, they have a lot. It's not farms like we have here, where these big, expansive things. Like a lot of times, people will find ways to grow crops on like a hill, because that's just the way it is. So up in the mountains, there are some. They grow a lot of sugar cane to export. They grow, let's see, I'm trying to think of they grow a ton of chickens, because they eat a lot of chickens, so you see a lot of chickens. But yeah, they do have produce, they do have farms. I don't think they export a lot of it, it's just to really support the population. One of their main exports that they grow would be sugar cane.
Yeah.
All
All
right. Any
right,
other
well,
questions?
yes, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot.
We're waiting for your next book.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you didn't know, the Maricopa County Library District does carry this book, so
Yeah.
if you didn't get to read it,
Read it, please.
you can check it out through the library.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, and then again,